we're not going to stop the process that is happening in the body. Bioidenticals aren't stopping it. We can't seek things that are going to end that process. It's going to change. Our bodies are going to change.
I'm Amy Woodall, and this is The Conscious Habit, a show from the People Forward Network. We're teaching you how to incorporate love and consciousness at work, at home, and the world at large. You just heard from Andrea Nakayama. As the host of the 15-Minute Matrix podcast and the founder of Functional Nutrition Alliance, Andrea is leading thousands of students and practitioners around the globe in a revolution to offer better solutions to this growing chronic illness epidemic. By highlighting the importance of systems biology, root cause methodology, and therapeutic partnerships, she helps historically underserved individuals reclaim ownership of their health. In our conversation on the podcast, we dig into the various areas that she recommends we start if we want to live an optimal life. She breaks down what functional nutrition means and some of the things that we can pay attention to in order for us to live more consciously in our own health. But first, we kick off with asking Andrea what her definition of consciousness is when it comes to health. Take a listen. Ooh, conscious habit listeners, I have to tell you, so I have had on my list for a while, I want a kick-ass, health expert on the podcast. So many of you listeners have asked for this and wanting to know how to be more conscious when it comes to health. And let me tell you, shout out to Chelsea from People Forward Network because she delivered. Our guest today, I have heard your name for many years from my mother, who is obsessed with all things health. But I've also listened to you on several podcasts over the years, and I'm just so thrilled that you said yes to being on the Conscious Habit podcast. Andrea Nakayama, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Amy. I'm super excited to be here with you.
So for those of you who may not be familiar, I encourage you to immediately go run and find her on, Instagram. And I know you've got a great Facebook page and you have an excellent blog, and we'll make sure that we get a chance to plug all of those things prior to. But Andrea is an expert in functional medicine nutrition. Am I saying that right? A functional medicine nutritionist. And your story is so incredible. I have so many questions as a constant health seeker. So, listeners, I'm going to be asking on your behalf, but I'm going to be asking on my behalf too, because I have a feeling we have a lot of the same questions. So I ask every guest when they come on, what does consciousness mean to you? But I'd love to know, what does consciousness mean to you in terms of our health?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And I think I'm realizing more and more as somebody who is an educator, trains practitioners, but also works with patients, that consciousness is a state of being aware and able to think about our own existence, our thoughts, our surroundings, but also our body. It's a really subjective and personal experience. It's about tuning in. I always like to say that in functional medicine, it's about creating a therapeutic partnership. And I think of consciousness in relationship to our health as having a therapeutic partnership with ourselves, with our body. And I think we've lost that in our constant quest for the fix, for what we think is going to be better. And I'd rather us slow down, tune in, and get into the synapses and crevices that really define who we are. To me, that's health consciousness, and that's health.
Well, I love that. And a lot of our listeners they're leaders, they're executives, they're business owners. And I think it's very easy for our health to become the afterthought because we're like, I'm a very, very busy person and I have a lot of things to do on my to-do list. And so what is it that you've noticed? And I know, so most of your focus is coaching coaches now who get to go do this work in the world because you really honed in on your expertise and found this, what worked. And then we're like, great, how do I teach the world how to teach the world, right? I love that. So if somebody listening right now doesn't have that connection to their body, they're not tapped in consciously, they're just kind of I'm a busy person, I've got things to do. What kind of things might they experience if we ignore that calling from our body or from our health?
Oh my gosh, so many things. I mean, it's a disconnect. And I really do think of the body as a vessel. And when that vessel is humming, our truth can come through. So, as leaders, as conscious leaders, we want our messages to come through. And I think it's harder for that authentic messaging to come through when we're in discord in some way. And we're in discord when we're ignoring, like you're saying, the nourishment, whether that's sleep or elimination or rest or joy that our body needs. We can't have that messaging coming through. We're forcing instead of allowing that flow to occur. So I think we experience, yes, all the signs and the symptoms that can occur for us as leaders, as humans, but we're also experiencing kind of a harder path when we're not in tune with our bodies, because we are, there is a flow that each of us has in terms of our messaging, in terms of what we have to say, in terms of our purpose and our passion. And that flow just can't happen when the body's in discord.
I love that you make that connection because I think there's a lot of folks, and I'm grateful that, to see that like mindfulness and managing the mind and having an understanding of the mind, like coming. People are more curious about that. That's, part of why people listen to this podcast. But we can't discount that mind, body, spirit is this, it's this integration between all of those things. And if we ignore one, we're not going to feel nearly as whole or, as optimized as we could be. And so I love that you mentioned that flow, because how many of us have felt like the hustle and the grind, it's a badge of honor instead of like maybe it's a sign that something's off.
Right. That's such a good point, Amy, because I feel like when we're forcing, we might have to shift other places to think about our flow state in order for the flow to come through. And I mean, I know from growing a business, I grew a business on my own back. So I grew a business as a leader to a 7-figure business, sold my business, still in charge of making goals. There's a lot of pressure in performance. And in truth, a place where a lot of women don't even reach the kind of business success I've been able to reach. And I don't say that as a pat on my back. I say that as a reality that a lot of us are trying, and it's hard to get where we want to go because there's a lot on our plates. And at the same time, recognizing that forcing isn't where it's going to come from, and that I have to constantly find balance and make sure I'm making time for the me part of the equation so that the work could come through. And I don't know if that makes sense, but I just think like we experience roadblocks, especially as female entrepreneurs. We experience roadblocks all the time, and we have to be able to nourish ourselves and remind ourselves of our grounding in order to move forward with I think the flow and the ease, but also the consciousness that we want.
Is that like the nervous system, right? So if our nervous system is dysregulated, if it is a hot mess, it's not just a matter of mind. Truly, the nervous system lives in the body. And so I so appreciate you mentioning that of like the things feeling difficult and challenging, feeling tired, feeling apathetic, feeling, all of the emotions that can come through are kind of signs and signals that our body is out of whack. And so your path has been, functional medicine and specifically on the nutrition side. I would love for you to just break that down. Functional medicine, nutrition, like tell it, what does that mean specifically?
Yeah, so functional medicine is a great question. And I think that it's a term that's being popularized today. So a lot of people are using the term, but I go back to the roots of that term. And what it really means is that there was a body of practitioners in the 1990s who were embracing three primary tenets in practice. And those three primary tenets were the therapeutic partnership, which I mentioned. How do we get in partnership with ourselves? But in a functional medicine practice, we're looking for a partnership with the patient, which means that every patient is being elevated to the status of a partner, that the practitioner isn't in the role of the God, they're in the role of the guide, and there is another expert in the room, and the expert is us. So really making room for the other expert in the room, which is the patient. So tenet number one. Tenet number two is that we look for the root causes, which means we ask, why is this happening? Not just what do we do about it? And we're in a culture, going back to that nervous system you were talking about, that is so built upon striving and achieving and getting a result that we've lost the reasoning, the why. We're just going for the what. I have joint pain. What do I do about it? I have fatigue. Should I get more coffee? Should I take these supplements? Do I need ashwagandha? We're looking for the what do I do about it instead of the why is this happening, which leads us to more sustainable results. So again, therapeutic partnership, looking for the root causes. The third tenet is a systems-based approach. And a systems-based approach helps us to embrace systems biology. And systems biology helps us understand that everything in the body is connected. We're not a bunch of ologies like healthcare has divided us into: psychology, gastroenterology, rheumatology, endocrinology, that everything in there is connected to each other. We know today that the gut is connected to the brain, that the brain's connected to the gut. And we're starting to understand the hormones are connected to the detoxification, which is connected to gut health. It's all connected in there, which is why the name of my program is Full Body Systems. It is a full body systems. In addition to systems biology, I like to embrace a systems-based approach. And a systems-based approach is basically, how do we apply what is called mental models, systems thinking, to complex problems. So we understand that the best thinkers throughout history have embraced systems thinking in order to solve the most complex problems. It's not always an individual thing. There's a way for us to see more globally so we know how to approach a problem. So that's my addition to the three tenets, which again, that therapeutic partnership, looking for the root causes, and a systems-based approach. That's what functional medicine is. And then I took that and really applied that to a different scope of practice, meaning how do we take that thinking and apply it to the everyday practices, the dietary and lifestyle practices that people have, so that we can all become practitioners in a way of a functional approach.
Man, I love this so much. And holy hell, is it the opposite of everything our medical system is built on, which you're like, yeah, that's intentional. Because for just when you said partnership, to like this therapeutic partnership, wow, when you do meet a physician or of whatever practice and they treat you with like, I trust that you know your body better than I do because you live in it. What a gift that is. And we all have ego. I have some physicians that I coach, and they will be like, we have the biggest egos. We'll, some of us can admit that, not all of us. But I love that. The root, what a gift to not slap a band-aid on it. That in itself is truly conscious, right? And then to know all systems are, everything comes together. It's not like this one thing. I love that you have really like the what, the why, and then, okay, now what?
The what, the why. I call it the what, why, who, how, now. Like, how do we address a what, why, who, how now?
Love that. I always love to ask people this question of how they got on this path. And very rarely have I ever heard somebody's like, I was born into a family and we loved this and we lived it. It's been my whole life. Sometimes that's the case, but a lot of times it's born out of a personal experience. What was it for you that led you down this path?
Yeah, so first and foremost, I can look back and see that there were little seedlings there, but I wasn't really on this path at all. I worked in a completely different career. I worked in book publishing as a production director, and my late husband was diagnosed with a very aggressive brain tumor, a brain tumor called a glioblastoma multiforme. He was diagnosed when we were just 7 weeks pregnant with our first and only child. This is back in April of 2000. And so that was our first time, and certainly my first time in the medical system. Right. So we had seen doctors, and I know we're even talking about the ego of doctors. Talk about neuro-oncologists, like you've got ego on steroids. Like they are the top of the heap. They know it all. But I was seeing gaps in the system that I wasn't really prepared for. I had never experienced. And those gaps were, number one, that a person is treated like their diagnosis, not like the human that they are. So here I was watching my beloved, my soulmate, treated like a walking dead man because he had a fatal brain tumor. And I was shocked. I was like, wait, what's going on? I don't understand. So seeing a person treated like their diagnosis, and I want to remind people, we are not just our diagnoses. We are people who have signs, symptoms, and diagnoses. So we can be those partners and not just look for the physician. There's more we can do for ourselves. The other thing that really astounded me is that every single person with the same diagnosis is treated the same. So not only are people treated like their diagnosis, but they're all treated the same if they have that diagnosis. We live in a system of protocols, X for Y. It doesn't matter if you have these other things going on or not going on. And the astounding part of that for me with my late husband, Isamu, was that he was just 31 years old. He just turned 31 when he was diagnosed. At that time, and this is no longer the case over 20 years later, but at that time, most of the people who had this diagnosis were older, were quite a bit older. And so he was kind of an anomaly, but during all they knew to treat this diagnosis was what they did for 70, 80, 90-year-old people. So that was just a really curious wake up to me of some of the gaps in our medical system. And as I went on through his treatment and diagnosis after he passed away, after I realized this was my calling and that I really wanted to do this work, I just experienced more and more gaps in the medical system. And I say that not to say something against our medical system. There's things I think it does really brilliantly. I can't perform a craniotomy, brain surgery, or radiation or chemotherapy, but there's a lot of time between those things occurring that a different level of care can be performed, given, encouraged. And so for me, the gaps just kept building upon each other. And I was realizing, wait a minute, we're missing a whole kind of healthcare practitioner to fill these gaps because the patient can't see it all alone. They're in the weeds.
Wow. And man, what just a trying time to go through to navigate. And were you just in research mode? Were you like, okay, I've got to dig in and figure out where does this start? Did you kind of go into the weeds in research mode and then figure out like, wow, we're symptom treaters. We're not going in, to the root of where all of this begins. Was it research and where did it lead you?
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of different things. It was research and practice. So it was really taking something and realizing, wait, nobody told us that, and how do we implement? So if I go all the way back to the days when my late husband was alive, there wasn't a lot available. I mean, the internet did not have a lot of information in April of 2000. There just was not the level of access that we have now, for better or worse. And we can talk about that too. But that meant I was reading books and I was looking into, does diet and lifestyle make a difference? Where does this fit? How does this work? I didn't know anything about functional medicine. I didn't find functional medicine until much later, but I was reading about the connections between sugar consumption and cell growth, which when we think about cells in an adult body, the fastest replicating or growing cells are cancer cells. So I would then present it to Isamu, who was a very stoic man who wanted the research, and he was doing research into which treatments to pursue because he was like the poster child for every clinical study because he was so young and therefore going to give them better outcomes in their clinical trials. So he was researching clinical trials, and I would say, hey, I'm reading this about sugar and cancer growth. What do you think? And, he was about to be a father. He wanted his life. This was just the beginning for him. And so he was willing to try anything. And so I then started researching what about sugar. So it was very specific research. I'm just giving that as one example, but that continued throughout. Like, where does meditation and stress reduction take place? And which diet do we want to pursue? We ended up going pesca vegan, eating a lot more plant-based foods. We had a lot to offset, not just with the cancer diagnosis, but with the treatment. And I just want to anchor on that for a moment because that's my job. My job as a functional medicine nutritionist isn't to address the cancer. It's to address the terrain or the environment in which the cancer is growing and in which the body is receiving treatment. So this is something that's often very hard for my students to understand because we want to go into fix. I have to fix this person. I have to help them. What's the protocol for lupus, right? We want that fix. Not my job. Somebody else has got that job. And I'm going to rely on that person for that job. I'm filling a gap that I'm filling is all of this exists in a body that I can shift the terrain in, that can potentially shift the trajectory of that diagnosis and offset the treatment that that person is going through.
Yeah, that's such a great distinction too. And to just know like what is controllable, that you may not get guidance is controllable, that plays such a major effect into how effective those other treatments might become. And I love that you said manage the terrain. What my mind immediately went to is like I pictured an aquarium and I'm like, okay, she can't control the damn fish that are put in the aquarium, but she can control, is it the right temperature? Do we have fresh water? Do it, how's the lighting? So that really helped my mind wrap around kind of where your work begins and where traditional medicine kind of meets in the middle.
Yeah, and I have a lot of models that speak into that. So I love the aquarium. That's a really good one. I think of it as a tree with roots and branches, and all the signs and symptoms and diagnoses are branches. So that's something we can tell people right now. List all your signs, symptoms, and diagnoses. Those are branches. That's not my job. I'm coming deeper through the trunk to the roots, but more so to the soil. The soil is what nourishes the roots, and there's so much we can do to nourish the soil in which the roots exist. And for any chronic condition, there's always three roots: the genes, digestion, and inflammation. So if I can focus on the soil around each of those roots, I am impacting the expression of the branches, but I'm not fixated. I call that tier 3 work. It's dismantling the dysfunction. I'm backing it up to ask again, wait, why? And even if I don't know why, I'm shifting what's happening.
Ladies, imagine taking time away to work on you. Meditation, yoga, transformational work, a chance to have grand adventures and build lasting relationships. Desiree Garcia and I founded High Vibe Tribe Retreats to create just that. And if you're curious about joining us on our next retreat, head over to highvibetriberetreat.com, link in the show notes. So the three again are genes, digestion, and inflammation. Is that always where you start? If somebody is coming to you, well, now it's many of your health coaches, right? So you're teaching this, but if you and I, if I were in a session with you, unsolicited coaching, thank you very much, Andrea. And I'm like, oh, I don't, I'm just so tired all the time. I don't know what's going on. I don't have any energy. Is that where you go, you said, okay, we've got to start with this. It's these three that we've got to start at. Is that the process?
The process is more about what I call the art of the practice. I have a lot of threes, so forgive me the threes, but
Okay, I love it.
but the art of the practice is for assess, recommend, and track. So before I do anything, before I say to you, Amy, my recommendation is let's start with the three roots, I have to do a really deep assessment, understand you, your history, the triggers through your life, what you know works for you and what hasn't, what's worked in the past, all the signs and symptoms that you're experiencing. You could come to me and say, I have X diagnosis. I want to understand everything. That's just a tiny little piece of the whole picture. And I also want to know what does sleep and relaxation look like now? What does exercise and movement look like now? I want what I call a functional nutrition matrix that helps me to understand all of Amy so that I know, hey, have you had a history with issues with disordered eating or food restriction or, turning against food restriction? Because otherwise I'm making recommendations without honoring you. So where it starts is with a very, very deep assessment. I will say to people, if you're making a recommendation without having done a thorough assessment, then you are not serving that individual. It's actually not patient-centered, empathetic care. After I understand that full picture, then I'm thinking through those three roots and what I call three tiers, making sure that we've addressed your non negotiables. And for me, the non negotiable trifecta is always sleep, poop, and blood sugar balance. But Amy, you also have your own non negotiables that it's my job to understand with you. What do you know helps you feel better or makes you feel worse? And are you honoring those things? Do you need help with those things? So it becomes a really deep bringing to consciousness, to bring it back to that term, a reality of how we treat ourselves. What is self health? So that I know I'm doing good by me.
I love that, just integrative approach as mentioned, but that it's very collaborative. And to be able to also have people reflect on like what does make me feel better or worse. Like I don't feel so great after 2 glasses of wine the next day. I don't feel so, I don't sleep so well when this happens. All of that's really great. Are there, for listeners, are there some things that you're like, regardless, everyone is so different. So there is no like, everybody should be on keto, everyone should be vegan, right? Does that, like, I saw a big smile go on your face when I said that. So I have a feeling that you're like, oh, can of worms opened. Let's go. Is there anything that you're like, everyone should do this, or is that just so vehemently against what you believe to be true?
Yeah, I mean, I think like when I come back to those non negotiables, it is sleep, poop, and blood sugar balance. And I also want to just explain that I'm talking to people who are not feeling well, right? They're sick in some way and they're not getting better. So the work I do isn't for the person who's just like, yeah, I want to just feel a little bit like it's work, right? It means like I've tried things, it's not working. I tried keto because so and so said it was good or it worked for my sister, but it made me sick and I don't understand why. So I just want to say, like, this level of internal inquiry is a pain in the butt for people who don't want to or don't have to do it, and bless them. I always say it's the work for the 20%, not the 80% who can follow an Instagram ad or do the next thing, and what they did 10 years ago works now. Bravo. So, so happy for those people. Unfortunately, I think the 20% of the population who's sick and not getting better, and we're seeing an increase in autoimmune conditions and in things like long COVID, where there was something going on in the body, and there was just one something that like tipped the things over the tipping point. But I think as we age, particularly as women, that 20%, that 80% and 20% flip, because once our hormones start to shift, there's a lot more inquiry. What we thought we could manage before is now harder to manage. So I think there's a reckoning that people are doing with their health and healthcare right now, and a seeking and a questing for feeling better, but looking in all the wrong places because of the noise that is available to us. So I just wanted to state that in terms of the everybody, what's right for everybody. Again, I'm going to go back to sleep, poop, and blood sugar balance. If you can dial those things in for yourself, you're likely to see the reverberation of a lot of other things resolving, and focusing there instead of on the branch is where we start to really see more long-term results.
Well, let's break those down. So, in the sleep category, what is recommended? How would I know if I'm getting good sleep?
Yeah, so that's another place where I'm going to go through an assessment and really ask you a lot of questions. We have a form, and on the Functional Nutrition Alliance site, we have several articles that I've written about sleep and our sleep assessment. But I want to understand from you, Amy, what does sleep look like now? Are you waking feeling rested? Do you wake up in the middle of the night? If you do, what happens when you do wake up? I want to really dial that in so that your sleep is serving you. Sleep, I just want to say, if we think about other aspects of health, it's, how we detoxify. It's one of our top ways of detoxification. So getting rid of what we don't need, that includes our dirty hormones, the hormones we don't need, which as we age, we have a lot of what's called dirty, quote unquote, estrogens that we don't need, that we need to get rid of. So sleep also serves the microbiome. And a lot of people are just taking, probiotics or prebiotics or on some bandwagon. Sleep is critical for so much of our function. So it's less about the number of hours. It is about, what does your sleep environment look like? How does your sleep feel? What's happening in the night? And we just dial that in so that your sleep is serving you and we can see the effects of your sleep.
Yes, very helpful. And I mean, I'm sure people go through those cycles too, which is helpful to be able to break down where it's like, oh, suddenly I'm up at 2 a.m. every morning. And that I'm sure gives you really good insight of what might be happening in the body. What's this poop thing, Andrea? Is there like a is there a number to that? Is it a quality quantity kind of issue?
Oh, my favorite question, quality, quantity.
This might be our first poop conversation. I talk a lot about shit, but maybe,
Yeah.
we're getting into the literal piece of it, which I
Let's
love.
go
I
to
love.
conscious pooping.
Yes,
Conscious pooping. Um, yeah, I really think that our poop, and I mean, like, look at what's in the toilet, not doing a stool sample like is, in functional practices these days in vogue. We don't need to test our poop necessarily. Just how does it feel? You should be going 1 to 3 times a day. It shouldn't feel urgent. It should feel full, like a sausage, not too liquid and not too hard to pass. We don't need to get obsessive about our poop. It is going to change every day based on a lot of factors, not just what we eat, but our stress levels, our sleep, what we drank or didn't drink. So it's going to change every day. But in general, what do you note about your poop? There are Bristol stool charts that help you assign numbers to your stool. So if you're like, oh, I'm like a 3 or a 4, and this is a sausage or not a sausage, but just knowing that we're eliminating is also really key for detoxification, for hormone balance, for knowing that we're getting the nutrients we need and we're able to process them. So that's where I like to tune into poop. None of this in an obsessive way, just in a, curious, interesting. What is, you know what? She just said I should poop 1 to 3 times a day. I actually go 12 times a day, or I only go every other day. And that gives us another place to focus, to say, wait a minute, what happens if I drink more water? Do I actually poop more or less? Does it change anything? What happens if I eat more fiber? Does that change things if I increase my plant intake? So it gives us a place to play and explore that isn't about the branch. Again, I'm trying to fix XYZ. It's instead nourishing the soil and what we can learn from the soil. And if you're a person who has problems with your poop, like can't eat fiber or something hurts when you do something, again, you bringing that knowledge forward to your providers puts you in a whole different driver's seat. Hey, doc, I notice when I try to increase my fiber, I don't know that they're going to necessarily do anything with it. It's not necessarily their expertise, but you know it. And bringing it forward is a key place of empowerment.
These are great, just noticing pieces. Again, back to that consciousness thing of like how, okay, just because I was in bed for 8 hours doesn't mean I slept well for 8 hours. Just, I've maybe have gone to the bathroom as needed, but doesn't mean that it's, it's going right. And I think like seeing our body kind of as an operating system and being like, I've got to, how is this thing wired? Where is it working well? Where is it not? So that we can, feel optimal. And I love that you mentioned that 80-20 and then the flip. I know many of our listeners because I have talked to, many of them as well who are women and are in that perimenopausal state. And so what worked for them, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, for them to feel really great is not working anymore. And so they have to go back to the drawing board. And so even for them, right, sleep, poop. And then the third is blood sugar. How do we even measure that? How do we know what are the signs that might be telling us that that is going well or it's not?
Yeah, so instead of the signs or symptoms, again, I'm going to bring us back to the soil. So we can, of course, see, are we fatigued or always hungry? Or those are the signs. We can get certain lab markers. People today are obsessed with continuous glucose monitors, which I think give us a lot of misinformation. And I'm happy to talk about why. But I really think if we just bring it back to fat, fiber, protein at every single meal, we start to shift our body's response to blood sugar and blood sugar balance. So fat, fiber, protein really does help with our ultimate blood sugar balance. When I would lead group programs that I had like hundreds of people, this is pre, continuous glucose monitors being available like they are today. And I actually had people finger pin pricking with, old diabetes devices. But ultimately, the rule was fat, fiber, protein, and we would see a shift in so many signs and symptoms. So again, fat, fiber, protein is the way to start managing our blood sugar. And when I talk about blood sugar, I just want to equate it to what you're talking about, because the way that we can think about hormones and that perimenopause and menopausal symptoms is by bringing it down to a base. So I've got my fingers in a pyramid structure here. At the base of that pyramid is blood sugar, and then insulin, and then cortisol or adrenal hormones, and then thyroid, and then sex hormones. If we're trying to address our sex hormones, which are the hormones that are causing the wonky signs and symptoms in perimenopause and as we age, then we're missing the foundation on which those are built. If we can address that blood sugar balance, if we can address sleep and poop, we're actually addressing hormone metabolization, which is where we start to see a better response to how our hormones are changing. I'm going to be 58 in less than a month here. So, I'm postmenopausal. I can't even tell you when my last period was. I'm going to knock on wood, but like for me, that was just an easy process. I was able to manage the symptoms, but I was already addressing those three roots. And in so doing, I was able to manage the signs and symptoms associated with perimenopause. It's signs and symptoms associated with a change as opposed to trying to We're not going to stop the process that is happening in the body. Bioidenticals aren't stopping it. We can't seek things that are going to end that process. It's going to change. Our bodies are going to change. What we want to manage are the signs and symptoms associated with that change so that we can still feel sexy, operate at a top of brain capacity, feel good in our bodies that are changing, but it doesn't need to be in a way that we bemoan or hate, which happens for a lot of people, and it can't be squelched.
Well, I love that you mentioned that because that even helps my own mindset of like the only way out is through. And so then it's a matter of like, okay, and so what are the conditions I'm building, right, in the terrain on my path through to make this, I don't want to say easy, but like to acclimate to the conditions that are happening that I cannot wish away, no matter what. So gosh, so helpful, all of those breakdowns. And I just want to mention, because I know you're doing some workshops on this, that narrative medicine is something that is really like you're stoked about it. You're talking about this out with the public. People can, sign on, learn more about it. What is narrative medicine, and what is its partnership with functional medicine?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm going to say thank you for asking the question. I feel like I'm still figuring that out. There are two worlds that don't really intersect out in the world. So, narrative medicine is a primarily new and pedagogical practice, meaning it is probably a little over 20 years old, and it's meant to train practitioners almost in empathy, right? Like, how do they bring more of the humanities to their practice, to the human condition? So, how do we see humans from a more human perspective? Even though the majority of my work is training practitioners, what I'm doing on my new website and with narrative medicine and with the book I'm writing is really trying to put this back in the hands of the conscious patient. How do we bring all these systems that we're talking about through functional medicine, nutrition, but then also with narrative medicine into our everyday to be, again, more conscious patients? So for me, what led me there was this recognition that the story is missing in patient care. And the story is missing for us. So when you asked me, Amy, like, where would you start? And I said, with an assessment, I want a patient to really be able to sit in that place with themselves, with ourselves, to recognize, hey, I didn't just get here overnight. This is a lifetime that has led me to this place. And not only my lifetime, there are epigenetic factors, ancestral factors that I carry in this beautiful body of mine that lead me to the things that I'm seeking help for today. And so for me, the narrative medicine takes us back to the beginning of our conversation about how we're better partners with ourselves, how we take a moment to slow down, get out of the fix, and get into the fabric of who we are by writing a story, by interacting with it. I'm not asking people to be writers. I might ask them in a narrative medicine workshop to listen to a poem, to really be with that person who's written that poem or created that art. And then 5 minutes of reflection, writing not to be a writer, but to see yourself, to bring to consciousness who we are navigating in this world outside of the signs, symptoms, or diagnoses that we so often over identify with.
Man, thank you so much for sharing. And I think for listeners, and even for me, I am a student as much as I am a teacher. In the consciousness space, to just remember that, the mind is one piece, and to be conscious of the subconscious and the unconscious mind, and, my belief systems. Am I living in centered with gratitude, and all of that, to mix in the body piece, to be curious and conscious about what's happening, what it's telling us. I love that you mentioned simply something I'm going to really monitor is sleep, poop, and blood sugar, and just, am I getting, fat, fiber, and protein in every meal, and just to be conscious around what's happening there. It's such an important part of this journey. So, Andrea, thank you for spending the time and sharing your expertise. Tell us what do you have going on? Where can people find you? Where can they learn more about what you're doing?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So over at andreanakayama.com and Andrea Nakayama, all the social places, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, that will lead you to my current writing, my current initiatives in narrative medicine, but also how I'm really trying to bring this understanding back to the patient, put some more empowerment and agency back into the patient's hands. And when I say patient, I mean all of us, because no matter who we are patients at one time or another. So Andrea Nakayama will lead you there. Will also lead you back to my work at the Functional Nutrition Alliance, where I train practitioners and love the work I get to do with reframing how we approach client care. It is a huge reframe for folks. So anybody who is looking to add to their practice through the lens of functional medicine nutrition, that's at Functional Nutrition Alliance. But Andrea Nakayama will lead you to all the places.
Thank you. Thank you. So grateful for your time, your energy, and all of your insights.
Thank you, Amy.
Before we wrap up this episode, here are my 3 takeaways from Andrea and how we can incorporate them into our lives. First off, y'all, I love that she has threes of threes of threes for everything. It fits so well into our 3 here. And I'm going to break down my favorite threes from Andrea. First, it's the 3 of what functional medicine really means. It is being in partnership with your practitioner, knowing and seeing that you are heard equally and that they trust you to know and understand what is up with your body. I love that the next piece is digging into the root. Not just what are you experiencing, but why the heck are you experiencing whatever symptoms you might bring to the table. And then third, the systems-based approach. I appreciate that they can see people as individuals, meet them where they are, but still know that there's a process in order to help them get to their best and most optimal health. My second takeaway would be the next set of threes. Hey, if we're not feeling our best, and maybe we're dealing with chronic illness like Andrea specializes in, or maybe it's just we've dipped into that flip of the 80-20 because of wherever we might be in life and how our hormones are acting a fool. And I appreciate that she broke down sleep, poop, and blood sugar. Y'all, we have talked about shit a lot on this podcast. I love that we finally talk about literal shit. How's it going for you? But if we're not feeling great, just being able to simply take a look at those 3. How well am I sleeping? How well am I going to the restroom on a regular basis? What is that like? Can I use that Bristol scale that she recommended? And how am I doing in regulating my blood sugar? I am someone who tends to overcomplicate their health, and I am willing to try whatever new fad is out there. And truthfully, I am just kind of winging it, throw spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. And I like Andrea's approach of it's actually more simple, and there are actually practical steps that we can take to ensure that we really are living with optimized and conscious health. And lastly, breaking down what the heck blood sugar is, prioritizing, and I've been practicing this ever since our interview, prioritizing fat, fiber, and protein in every single meal. I think my biggest takeaway from our time together is just wanting to be more conscious. Being a conscious human of the mind isn't nearly as powerful if we are not conscious also in the body, because this mind, body, spirit, existence that we have, it's a collaboration. They don't all exist separately in a vacuum. And if we don't have them all thriving well together, then we and ourselves are not thriving. Thanks for listening to the Conscious Habit Podcast. If you dug this episode, we'd love it if you would subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. And if you're into this consciousness thing, if you like this conversation and you want to meet more like-minded people, head on over to Facebook and join the Conscious Habit community. Until next time, do the world a favor and go love yourself.